Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great start to your week. Good to see you all. Before we get into today's cool live stream and topic, let us know who you are and where you're from. We always like to see where people are checking us out from live. So, today we're going to talk about how to write lyrics that singers will like to sing. Because believe it or not, when you write a song, and lyrics, not the singers don't always like to sing your lyrics, and not because they object to the words or the meaning of the song, but sometimes when songwriters who are not singers write songs for singers to sing, the songwriter doesn't realize that some sounds are very hard or harder for singers to sing or to sustain or sing really high. So I remember when I first was writing lyrics and I gave it to singers singer in a band I was in, the singer objected often. Well, I can't sing this in this moment at this at this level of the pitch range, and I had to rework the lyrics, not understanding that what I wrote was not always easy for the singer to sing. Being a guitar player, I didn't know that. So anyway, we're going to talk about that and get you want to get this right so that's it's easier for your singer or any singer to sing, and they'll want to sing it. It's enjoyable for them to sing, so that they want to sing it. It's just going to make everything easier and better. So we'll talk about sort of what are the which sounds in words, vowel sounds, are easy to sing and high to sing or hard to sing in what situations. So, as a songwriter, what a singer would be able to easily do, or what would be really hard or strain their voice or make things hard. It's really important to know this. And what are some considerations or preferences that singers may have in terms of what they want to sing in what situation? So we're going to talk about those things, and we'll start with bringing in a very special guest, longtime friend of mine, and expert coach on songwriting and lyrics in particular, and that is Deanna DeCabrus. Hello,
Hello.
Deanna.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, great to have you again. So, Deanna, maybe you've heard my little intro here, and maybe you can talk about sort of what sounds are easy or hard to sing, and how a songwriter can help their singer perform at their best. What non singers might not know about how words affect a singer's ability to perform or sing those words.
Yeah, well, this isn't something that most of us think about before we start writing, and it's not something that I would ever have thought about before I started writing lyrics. But there are a few simple principles that can be very helpful. So when we're singing, we've got the sound that we're hearing is the result of the interaction between the level of tension or release in the throat, and then like on top of your kind of windpipe, you've got your vocal cords. And for us to hear a sound, they're connected. If they're apart, and you can all try this at home, it's just you just hear a breath. So that's my vocal cords apart. If they're connected, that's when a sound comes out. So if I'm putting a lot of pressure on them and they squeeze apart, that's when you're going to get a kind of vocalist who's going that's when you're going to get this kind of flip and this loss of vocal power, especially in high registers. And then there's the place where the sound is vibrating. It might be vibrating kind of in our chest. So if you put your hand there and you go, you're going to feel it resonate under your hand. It might be vibrating in your head. It might be vibrating in your mouth. All those things give us the quality of the sound. And the shape of the inside of your mouth gets changed quite dramatically according to what type of vowel or consonant you're sounding. So the more narrow the shape of our mouth, the easier it is to keep those vocal cords together. And the broader the shape of our mouth, the harder. So if you think about the sound, that is like the in bat, that's a broad sound. So if you just say bat, that kind of, you can see that my mouth is getting broader. So try that out yourself. You'll probably notice, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you'll notice your mouth gets broader too. If you say like a long ooh, that's typically a much narrower sound. You can see, I mean, I've got quite a small mouth, but ooh. You just can see it physically, and you're able to see it and feel it yourself. So not like a real ooh, but an ooh. So it's much easier to maintain chord closure and power and accuracy on those narrower sounds than on the broader sounds. And so broader sounds in especially higher pitches are more likely to waver in pitch. And so, for example, I had a song where the first line of the chorus was "Today is heroism," and is kind of like ah. You can see that my mouth's going into the same shape, and the word heroism went on a really high note. And I would sing this line over and over again. I was like, why does heroism always sound out of tune? Finally figured out this was what it was. And you can, if you've written a line that you kind of can't really be changed, and you're getting that kind of a thing, you can change it the way you sing it. And in that instance, I changed the to more of an I sound. So I'm just going to give you a very quick demonstration. So keeping it in a broad, hard sound, or sound that's more difficult to sing. Today is it's supposed to be heroism. So even then you can hear it go, today is this kind of tends to do that. If I keep it narrow and I change that to more of an is sound, it's much easier. Today is heroism. I was able to keep it much more stable. So, I can still sort of be understood, but you can make tweaks like that. But equally, if you know ahead of time that you're not going to put sounds or sounds on your highest notes, that can be helpful too. So that's just an example. But if you also think about where each syllable fits in, any syllable is any word is made up of syllable and consonant sounds, vowel and consonant sounds. That might sound like an obvious thing to say, but the consonants in a word can't be made longer. So if you think of the word car, we can't make the k bit longer. So if you've got a long held out note or a little melodic run or something like this, we can't make the k longer, but we can only make the vowel sound longer. So if you have a long vowel sound and we're waiting to have a consonant on the end to understand what the word means, that can be quite ambiguous, because part of your objective as a lyricist is to be understood. So you're aiming for clarity. So as well as the fact of certain sounds being harder to consistently achieve at high volume, and also if your vocalist is doing a lot of gigs and you don't want to put them in a situation where something's going to require a lot of stamina and require them to be at their 10 out of 10 peak performance every single time. So there's that aspect of it, and there's also the aspect of making yourself understood. So if I've got a word like car, I could sing a long note at the end of a line, and we know what that word is. But if I start with a word, let's say I start with a syllable with an E sound, that could be eat, each, east, and I'm having to wait a long time to understand what the phrase is. So that's something else to watch out for as well, that's more related to how the word is than necessarily what the sound is. So in general, for the first question, the easier syllables to help your vocalist accurately reproduce at kind of especially higher pitches are going to be the narrower ones. So oo or ah are going to be easier than a and e and and eh. So those are also the or oo sounds are usually easier to extend, and the harder ones are going to be the ow, e, a. And even just watching me say them, you can see that my mouth goes wider while I'm forming those sounds. So that's just a guideline in terms of what's easier to achieve, and what another consideration is if you've got a long note, a long syllable. If you've got a word at the end of the line, it's quite nice to have a word that doesn't have a last syllable, a last consonant, in order to be understood. So car rather than cart. Some vowel sounds are easier to extend. Some compositional opportunities can also come from this. So this is definitely something I never would have picked up on by myself in a million years. But given that different vowel sounds, then we've got 5 different vowel sounds. If you had a pentatonic scale, you've got 5 different notes. If you were writing a solo or a melody, you might choose to create a melody out of 2 notes or 3 notes, and there might be a different part of the song where you're going to bring in more notes. you can do this kind of thing with different vowel sounds. So if you, for a certain section of the song, restricted it to 1 or 2 vowel sounds, that's going to have this kind of, there's going to be a repetition of those sounds to start with, and that's going to create kind of an interesting internal rhythm. And it can have quite a sort of hypnotic effect, and it will give that section of the lyric a certain quality. And when you then go into a subsequent section, and we start to hear new vowel sounds, the listener is going to pick up on that and it's going to give them like a burst of new interest in the song. And so deciding which vowel sounds you're going to use when, as well as making life easier for your singer and giving your listener the opportunity to really understand easily what the song is about, can also give you some quite interesting compositional opportunities. It's like you've got these 5, I guess a pentatonic is kind of quite a good comparison in a way. And the idea that one might create melodies using specific notes from a pentatonic, and then we've got some notes that we're going to hear later. And no one will be able to put their finger on why that change feels dynamic, or why there's a kind of contrasted feeling in a new section. But that will be because of the way you've chosen these different sounds. So there's a whole lot of different considerations when it comes to the vowel sounds. There's the ease with which the singer is going to be able to pull them off. There are perhaps the modifications that you can make if you've got a word like, I don't know, I would have found it very hard to rewrite the line "today is heroism" in the context of the rest of the song. There are some little modifications you can make if you've got a sound that's awkward, but there's also creative opportunities and compositional opportunities in how you think about this. So that's really the first kind of level of considering vowel sounds, that in a nutshell, narrow sounds easier at high pitches than broad sounds. Broad sounds tend to distort.
So that's interesting. I think you mentioned earlier that when the throat stays narrow, the mouth stays more narrow, it's easier for the singer to keep those notes in tune.
Yeah.
Okay. But yet the voice or the throat is restricted, where like where the throat is open, it's would seem to be physically easier to make the sound, but maybe less controllable in terms of intonation. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So when the mouth, your throat can stay this, like you'll be able to keep your throat in the same sort of state of tension or relaxedness, but it's the shape of the inside of your mouth. So if it's narrower, it's easier to keep the vocal cords connected, and that's our controlling our pitch. If it's wider, that's harder. It's not impossible. People can develop technique, and there's ways it's not impossible, but it's perhaps easier.
So if you had a singer that was singing high and it was having a hard time, he or she had a hard time keeping it in tune, maybe just changing the word or the
really help.
The sound that's being sustained might help keep it in tune. That's interesting. Good for us non-singers to know that information when a singer is struggling.
Well, if you were at home just now and you try singing the word "hey," and you just try, I'm not going to do it too loud now because I don't want to blast all your eardrums. But if we recorded that, it would be much more likely to go than if we recorded ooh or ah. It's much easier to keep those sounds stable. And there's even a technical word for it, which is when the vowel splats.
Could you say that again? When the vowel does what?
Splats.
Splats. S-P-L-A-T-S?
Yes.
Haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. And it's that kind of like thing that it does. So and it's not something you'd really have any reason to know about if you weren't a vocalist. And even if you're a vocalist, but you've never, perhaps if you're self-taught, just sung a lot, you also wouldn't have any reason to have worked that out. And if there was a line that felt difficult, you would just assume that it was you, like I did with my line. Yeah. And then that was the thing I learned, and I was like, oh.
Interesting. Well, I've learned a lot already, actually. So, by the way, for those of you here with us live, if you have questions, ask them in the chat, and we'll go through. When I say we, I mean Deanna, of course. We'll answer whatever questions you have on topic, of course. So, let's not go off topic, but it's on topic. All right. So, awesome stuff, Deanna. Do you want to continue with this whole idea?
Sure. So I noticed that Fred Flintstone says in the chat that tension is a problem. So yeah, tension is a significant inhibitor of vocal performance, but it's not the only thing. So if you've got, I guess it's kind of like a door with more than one lock. If you had loads and loads of tension, just changing the syllable sound might not fix it. And if you had not very much tension, but you had the wrong vocal sound, you could also still have a problem. But the tension isn't the only thing, but tension is indeed very important. So let's say you were sort of taking this on board and you were playing around with the sounds of vowels as a creative thing. So now you've got in mind that you're going to sort out the syllables that are going to be on the highest notes, and you're going to keep it in mind to try and have these syllable sounds that are a little easier to sing, and that's the oo or ah rather than the ow or e type things. But let's say that you now are looking at you're going to look at writing from the point of view of these sounds and using them as a little palette of different colors that you're going to change throughout the song. And in a way, this idea connects with something songwriters may already be familiar with, which is you wouldn't want typically to have the end rhymes of your lines be too much on the same sound. So if you think about the first verse of, if you think about Hotel California, you've got these rhyming couplets, but we don't have the same sound. It doesn't repeat the same sound, which is kind of like it's. I can't exactly remember what they are off the top of my head, but if we looked them up now, we would find that the end rhymes of each of those couplets were different. It's not like way day and then thin and then say play. So we are not getting a repeating vowel sound at the end of the line, and that's you might already have come across that concept in lyrics, but you can take that further into the whole of the rest of the section by having these restrictions on what vowel sounds you're going to use. So you can, if you find that to be too restrictive, you can also choose to feature. You're not going to necessarily constrain yourself to only having certain vocal sounds, but you might choose to feature one particular sound a lot. And the word that we have for that is assonance. So assonance is when we're going to get a repeating vowel sound. And it's a really powerful, subtle compositional tool because it creates these rhythmic connections within the other rhythms in your melody and in your arrangement. So if we just think about, I mean, this is something that rappers do a lot, and this is part of what distinguishes, I guess, quite high-level rap lyrics from more sort of like beginner rap lyrics. But if we go, so Eminem's, he's very masterful when it comes to this. First bit of Lose Yourself, we've got, he's grown farther from home, he's no father. He goes home and barely knows his own daughter. So we've got all these O sounds. Hold your nose, because here goes the cold water. And you almost can't help yourself from starting to do it rhythmically. So if I say again, look out for all those O sounds. He's grown farther from home, he's no father. He goes home and barely knows his own daughter. Like, hold your nose, here goes the cold water. You almost can't help, like the rhythm of that line is kind of irresistible because of all those repeated O sounds that are stitching through it. And when you combine that with all the other elements in a song, it can create this extra sort of drive and propulsion. And it can also create a sense of acceleration. Let's say you're heading into, it's a section where you really want someone to focus. The meaning of that line is very important. You really want people to focus on that line. It's a way that you're going to drag their attention. Like, they won't be able to resist it. They won't really know why. And this is something I think is really fascinating about anything to do with rhythm, is that it's never something that we consciously notice in the way we might notice, I don't know, like a trumpet starting to play in a song where we had heard no trumpets until that point, or a new kind of very dissonant chord. Those things we kind of know what it is that we're reacting to. But rhythmical things tend to act on us in a very direct but less sort of obvious way. And that, I think that's very cool. You're kind of almost hijacking the listener. So there are opportunities not just to use assonance once, but to use different kinds of assonances weaving through your lyric. Longer syllable sounds like O are going to have different rhythmic patterns to shorter syllables like at. So you could almost create a little rhythmic motif out of sounds that repeats itself through your lyric, just like you could have a rhythmic motif on other instruments. And that would be very subtle, very sophisticated, but it would still act very powerfully on your listener. It's not cleverness for the sake of cleverness. So that's a few other more creativity oriented ideas in terms of how one could use vowels. And Tom Hess is always really masterful about kind of drawing connections between how we can apply compositional ideas in different ways. And perhaps you would have a comparison here with something guitar related, like choosing from a certain group of notes, or featuring one note prominently and repeatedly and having that as a kind of touchstone of a particular solo as it develops.
Yeah, sure. Like to use a guitar playing analogy, like modulating pitch function, when you have a note that appears over and over again, but under a different chord. So the feeling of that note is different, even though the same note, the same sound is repeated. It's perceived in a new way each time because of the relationship with the underlying harmony changes. So the note feels different. I guess that's sort of the analogy that I can draw upon there. So you mentioned a lot about vowel sounds. Um, what can we do with consonant sounds? Consonant.
Yeah, yeah. So there is a lot we can sort of think about consonant sounds in the same way. There are the technical considerations, and then there's some creative considerations. And I'll start with going through the technical considerations. They can have a really big impact on the sound, and they can present particular technical challenges. If you've ever taught guitar and you've tried saying fifth string, sixth string, fifth string, or if you haven't taught guitar, you can still try and say that. You can see that we can only say it 3 times or something before it becomes too hard to say. So the consonants, all the consonants we use are formed in different parts of our mouth. So if you try this at home, you're going to get b and p that are formed on the lips. So try and say the word pub. It's a great British word. And you're going to feel it on your lips, pub. The p and b are not identical, but they're still formed there. And just notice that, because it's not also, you know, what you learn to speak before without really even thinking about it. So these are never ideas that we consciously think about. We're just using language the way we use it. And then f, f, t, m, they're going to be made more with the front of the mouth. So if you say the word foot or Teflon, that's foot. It's all in the front. If you just say that at home and concentrate on where you feel the sound being produced, foot, Teflon, pub, it's all at the front. So G and H or G, H, they're much further back. So you say the word hug, that's further back, or hag. You can, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's, it's going to be, it feels totally different. Once you concentrate and direct your attention to feeling where it is. So if you say foot and then hag, does anyone try that and not notice that? Does anyone think, I can't notice any difference? Put it in the chat if you can't.
It seems pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, as soon as you sort of concentrate on it, like, yeah, that does actually feel quite different. So we, and then you've got th and l, and they involve the tongue. So if you say the word long, the tip of your tongue has to touch the roof of your mouth to make the L. If you try and keep your tongue flat, you can't do it. So long is going to be the tip of the tongue. The tongue touches the roof of the mouth, and then on the N, G's at the end, long, you're going to feel the middle of your tongue go up to touch the roof of your mouth. So there's all this stuff that's happening in your mouth to produce sound and produce language and produce the consonants. And the implications for singers are, so there's at least 2 sort of considerations about writing that are going to come from this. To start with, if you have got a lot of words where you're switching from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth, that will be hard to do consistently and fast and accurately. So if you think about the word nightgown, where we go from a T on the teeth to a G at the back, that's going to be harder to sing fast than a word like TV. Try this. See how many times you can say nightgown in a row before it just gets nightgown, like I can say it about 4 times and it starts to disintegrate. Whereas if I go TV, 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 that's a lot easier. And with anything that's a tongue twister, if you analyze it this way, you'll see that it's a word that's using consonants formed in very different parts of the mouth. So that's one aspect of it. If you have got words where we was trying to get the singer to form these sounds in quick succession in different parts of the mouth, there's going to be a higher failure incidence than if there's not a high density of switching around to produce the sounds. So and if you write 2 words next to each other with similar consonant sounds, and this is now the second consideration, those words are going to tend to bleed into each other. And so we're going to compromise on our other important creative objective of clarity. So if I were to write the phrase, the line, and I had the word dark and the word corner, dark corner, those two cut sounds right next to each other are going to make us liable to collapse that into da corner, dark corner, da corner, da corner, da corner, da corner. Try that again at home. You see, it doesn't take very many repetitions or that much speed before that starts collapsing in on itself. So we would prefer to perhaps write dark space or obscure corner, or there's lots of other words for dark, and we would rather have ourselves be understood than have those two sounds run into each other. I don't think there's a direct
Yeah, it makes sense what you're saying, and I'm just thinking back to all the times being in bands with singers and singers protesting about certain lyrics, but at least the singers that I've been in bands with, most of them couldn't articulate to whoever wrote the lyrics what the problem was. They would just say, "I cannot sing this. I cannot do this. This is too much or too difficult to sing." And the rest of the band were just like, "What are you talking about? This is just simple, plain English." But with the way you're describing it, makes sense. I'm just thinking back on those conversations where singers were sometimes protesting against singing certain combinations of words or certain sounds in certain situations, but maybe because they weren't professionally trained, most of them couldn't really articulate exactly, specifically what the problem was, which made it more difficult to rework the lyrics than it was just trial and error. But the way you're describing it, it's very clear now.
Well, thank you. Good. And I think if you are a singer and you're finding something difficult, you're typically going to think it's just because you suck. And that's not a constructive place from which to do your best work. So it's quite nice to be able to analyze it from the lens of what is going on at the level of the language and how does that interact with the singing. And I think it depends what kind of school of singing one has been trained in, or indeed whether you're self-taught or not. If you're self-taught, I don't see how you would ever work this stuff out by yourself. I mean, somebody obviously did at one point, or there was, that it comes from more from the field of linguistics and language study than it does from singing. And some schools of singing this isn't really what they focus on, or not in a lot of detail. So it definitely makes a difference to have this as a lens with which to audit your lyrics or your lyrical ideas. And it also makes it, let's say you had a section where you needed to change something. In the era of having dictionaries and thesauruses online, it's very easy once you know what it is you're looking for to say, well, I need something that's 2 syllables, and I want this kind of syllable, and I don't want that kind of syllable. And your thesaurus is going to give you a whole raft of different options, and you can pick the one that suits your purposes best. So if you, and indeed, I wouldn't have really understood the idea of clarity as a compositional goal when I started out as a lyricist and a songwriter. So I, like many of us, came to it because I loved listening to music and I had songs that I was really into, and I wanted to have that kind of desire to express myself. But I didn't have like a little lens. I didn't have any lenses with which to review my work or my drafts. And so I had no way to adjust things, and I didn't know why they weren't working musically or otherwise. So this idea of clarity and the idea of which slightly inventorying what types of sounds I've got and what consonants I've got and how I'm using them and all the rest of it is, I think, gives us a lot more control over what it is that we're going to say and how we're going to say it, and a lot of ways to solve problems. And I see that Warren has mentioned alliteration. So alliteration is also an interesting and useful concept. It's the consonants version of assonance that we talked about a little bit earlier. So assonance was when we had a vowel sound repeating. Row, row, row your boat. That's assonance. That's also repetition, but yeah. So alliteration would be when we have a repeating consonant sound. So, for example, the word that's coming to the phrase that's coming to my mind is deadbeat dad, but I don't want to say that because that's kind of nasty. Let's think of something else. Dog days. That's a alliteration. So I'm sure you're gonna be able to think of loads more. So that in itself can and for example, Taylor Swift, Bad Blood. But if you're into poetry and you've come across alliteration, there's a version of it that I think is even more intriguing for songwriters. And that is when you think about groups of consonants. So it's not just repeating one consonant, but because we can group consonants into their related sound. So we already saw P and B in pub, and we call those we talked about them in terms of where they're formed in the mouth earlier. So we were talking about them from a mechanical and technical point of view, and from the point of view of executing them consistently and what the challenges might be there. But if we talk about them now in terms of their sound, well, the plosives, P and B, got the dentals formed on your teeth, D, T, and N. We've got the fricatives, F, Th, and V, and we've got the sibilants, S and Sh. And so those sounds we could sort of call them similar. And then we've got T and K, and they're also quite similar. So what this means for us creatively is we can repeat a run of related sounds. So we're not only restricted to creating patterns by using the exact same consonant. So if we get, the exact same consonant would be baby, now we've got bad blood, Taylor Swift, whisper words of wisdom, the Beatles. That's cool. That's a great technique for sure. But we can also choose consonants from the same group to create these subtle sonic connections that weave through your lyric. So an example, and that would be using consonants from the same group. So they're still going to sound similar, but they're not going to be identical. But they will create these sound relationships. So instead of buys a box of berries, that's all using B's, we could have picks a bag of peaches. It's still using B's and P's. It's still plosives. It's a little bit more subtle. So it's still got that musicality though. If I say it again, buys a box of berries, picks a bag of peaches. And if you say that at home, just try saying the word picks a bag of peaches. It's still got that little lilt and rhythm in it, and musicality, and the relatedness that's caused by the use of consonants from the same group. But it doesn't hit you over the head with it. And you could use it in line after line, and it would build up this kind of pattern in a way that would be very hard with one consonant, because it'd just be hard to get the meaning. But B, it might be a little bit too much. So in that particular example, picks a bag of peaches, it starts kind of goes P and then B and then P, so they kind of cross over. That's sort of cool as well. So you could create all kinds of interesting patterns where you're making these sound relationships within the lyric, and the listener will register that in a subtle way. They won't be able to define what it is, but they'll just know that they enjoy it. And so I guess in that kind of example, what would be a musical equivalent of using, I guess we could also, that could be pitch range, or it could be it could be like a couple of consonant particular note functions would be perhaps an analog in terms of melodic compositional choices.
Yeah, or bends and vibrato, since they're both both based on bending strings, similar. But what I wanted to ask you a question here. So on these consonant sounds that are from the same group or family, like P and B or D and T, is this harder to sing? I would imagine that it might be, but maybe a little easier than just straight alliteration.
That is a very good question. I think that my best estimate to that answer, and I haven't kind of made a sort of thorough side-by-side comparison, but because they're being produced in the same part of the mouth, they should be pretty fine to sing. I think the biggest challenge is when we're going to different, if we're going from front to back or back to front quickly. But if they're being produced in the same part of the mouth, Like
it's easier.
example, that should be easier.
Got it. Okay.
And it shouldn't really make that much difference whether it's the exact same letter or like a close by letter, exact same consonant or a close by consonant.
Yeah. Good. Great. That's very valuable. I hope those listening are I hope this is generating ideas for you, because this is very, very useful stuff in working with a singer, writing for a singer. Yeah.
I would say that it's not common in most songwriting materials that you'll find online, or the most of the lyric writing books that might be pitched at songwriters starting out or lyricists starting to develop will typically not contain these ideas. They're a little bit more, I suppose they're considered more technical, but I don't think there's anything that difficult about them. Like, I think everyone here I could understand them quickly and could apply them and could explore them. So, and it would really set you apart, because there would then be a level of detail in the decision making and in the sounds being created and in the sonic patterns that would set your lyrics apart.
Technical, but not necessarily advanced. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't think it is advanced. We can instantly all execute that and hear it and feel it and understand it. And so I think it's not something that most songwriting content aimed at amateurs that are starting out or developing goes into.
Right.
So
but you don't have to be an advanced songwriter to use these ideas.
No, just like you don't have to be an advanced guitarist or songwriter to develop a solo, to have as a strategy for developing your solo. Okay, well, the first part, I'm going to use notes 2, 4, and 5 of my, or flat 3, 4, and 5, and then we're only going to hear the flat 7 near the end. So that's going to be my. And then when we hear it, we're going to, that's not something that would have occurred to me as a beginning guitarist, but I can understand the idea quite quickly. So I think this is a similar. It's not something that would ever have occurred to me, but we can all know what it is quite easily.
So, Deanna, what happens when, or what would you do, or what would you recommend other people to do? What can we do if we have word choices that aren't really working? We're trying to write lyrics and it's just not working. What do we do then? Okay,
so then let's say I have a word, let's say I have a line, and at the end of that line is the word pub, our friend from earlier. And I'm like, and let's say that somebody's looking forward to seeing their friends at the pub. And I want that to be an expression of exuberant, social sort of yay. But if I try and sing a long note on the word pub, the word is over very quickly. Pub or pub. It's like the isn't sort of doesn't sound that great. It sounds kind of blah. So let's say I'm going to need to find a one syllable word that's an alternative. So really, you're just going to look in your thesaurus. You could just try and use your mind, but using a thesaurus is probably going to be a little bit quicker. And you're just going to put in the word pub, and you're going to see what the synonyms are. And if you were to do that, one of the synonyms for pub, I'm willing to bet, would be the word bar. And the word bar meets quite a lot of our criteria from earlier, because we've got an R sound. That's one of our preferred sounds. It doesn't have a syllable on the end. So as soon as you sung the word going to the bar, everyone knows, doesn't matter how long that note is, we already know what the word is. So I think the first thing to do is to audit what you think the problem is. So look at the word from the point of view of what is the vowel sound? What are the consonant sounds? Is it that I don't have enough, I can't extend the vowel, or when I do, it's hard to sing, or it doesn't sound good. So maybe the vowel sound needs to change. Or is it that it's hard to make this word long and for it to sound good, and I want to have a long note there, or I want to have like a little melodic run of some kind. So if you analyze what the problem is, then it's much easier to look in your thesaurus, know that you want a word of one syllable and you want this kind of a vowel sound. But and then it's much easier to find solutions. But I think one of the things that's hard is when you know something isn't working, you aren't quite sure why. because then you're just trying alternatives randomly. And you think that it's you that typically we always tend to assume in that kind of situation that it's us that sucks. So
yeah, exactly. So before I ask you the next question here, I wanted to take a question here from Cynthia, who asks, does it always come down to the type of singer you write for? I think maybe what Cynthia is asking is, how much do you have to plan or make possible adjustments for the individual singer versus how much of these ideas you're sharing are basically universal?
well, this is a great question. I think there are a number of different answers. So one consideration is that the singer will have a range. So I know that I cannot be doing that many notes above A unless I want to be very stressed. So that's I typically will not write. There might be one or two that are a semitone or a tone higher, but I'm not going to be writing a whole lot of stuff that's above that A right there. Oops, that one right there. So if this is for you, or let's imagine it was for you, or if it was for somebody that you know, one consideration that doesn't really have too much to do with the lyrics yet is simply what their normal range is. Now, if I am going to sing a note that's up here, or that's going to be, one of these, I can sort of get into there in my head voice. I don't want to sort of spend too much time up there, but we can go there. But I'm certainly not going to be putting difficult sounds up there. So firstly, what is a singer's range? And then secondly, once you're in the top part of that person's range, that's when you're really going to be careful about the vowel sounds. So it may sound, by the way that I'm talking about it, that you have to kind of plan every little thing out. And like, that sounds really complicated, like it would take a really long time. But it's not really that way, because there's not going to be, not all the lines in your song, in like we think about, I don't know, 2 4-line verses and a 4-line chorus, for example, not all of them are going to end on kind of high or climactic notes. That is going to happen a few times in the song. So adjusting a few vowel sounds it's really an achievable thing to do. So the singer's natural range is one thing, and then within that kind of overall range, so I've got a kind of fairly typical alto range. It goes from this E, this is the lowest note I'm going to have, and that's going to be the highest kind of mixed note, and I might, I'm not really going to venture much higher than here. But within that range, that down there, I'm not also going to spend that much time down there, because even though I can kind of sing it, it's starting to become, the chords are starting to peel apart a little bit. So I'm not going to go spend that much time down there. And actually, the sounds are easier there. But then oo's getting quite underpowered down there. So the oo sound that was easier when we were higher is a little bit, it's struggling a little bit down there. It's like the wrong gear for that part of my vocal range. So there's not only the singer's complete vocal range, but also the segments of it. So the more you get into the singer's chest voice, which is, you might have heard of those terms, head voice and chest voice, it just means where the sound is vibrating. As the pitches go down, the sound is going to vibrate more in the chest. As the pitches go up, the sound is going to vibrate more in the head. So that's a consideration. Let me just look at your question again. Does it always? Yes. So, and then the other consideration would be, how open to feedback is your vocalist, and how willing are they to try things out in different ways? Some vocalists aren't necessarily all that interested in other people's input. I don't know if anyone in the chat has ever worked with a vocalist like that.
Never.
Never. Can't imagine what I'm talking about.
Aren't they all like that? Most.
So that's another consideration. Are they going to, if the lyrics are lyrics that they have written or that you've co-written and they've written that particular bit, and they might not be very happy to change it, but then if you are tactful and you explain that, I'm sure also, if you were to say that it would be interesting to hear it this other way, and if they hadn't, I think it can be difficult with some personalities to suggest that you know more about their thing than they do. So if you're starting to tell them, well, it's going to be easier if you sing on this closed vocal sound and make the label sound, they might be like, yeah, I know about that. So that's going to be a question of your personal psychological skills and the interface between you and the singer's personality. And so I guess in that sense, if you were working with a singer that was very willing to take input and suggestions and try things out, then you could absolutely try all of this out. If you were working with a singer that was perhaps less open to that type of input, it would be a question of paying a lot of attention to the different parts of their range. And just like there's anyone who's ever done any writing for orchestra or has perhaps plays other instruments apart from guitar, there's certain notes that are not as easy for a flute to play, and you're not going to put too many of those particular notes in. There's different instruments going to have their different characteristics or different techniques that are available to them in different parts of their range. And I think for example, if you think of a piano or keyboard, it's quite easy for a keyboard player to play parts where there's huge leaps in interval, like da 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 da. We can just do this. That's hard for a singer to do. So there's the character that all human voices are going to have certain technical restrictions, and I think it's quite hard for strings to do as well. Those kind of wider interval jumps, they're very, very easy for a piano to do. It's not challenging. So I would say that it probably does come down to the type of singer that you write for, but there are going to be certain rules that apply generally. I'm now interested in who the singer is and who you're writing for, or what song you're writing.
Yeah. Are there, just to shift gears here a little bit, are there other compositional opportunities that we can draw out of lyrics?
So I would say that thinking about rhythm is quite a good way to remember what these are, because when you start writing songs, certainly when I started writing songs, I thought about chords, tune, and words. Like those are the things that you notice the first. Like, I've got to have some chords and I've got to have some words, and then rhythm. You there's going to be a rhythm in the line, and there's going to be you might experiment with improvising with different vocal melodies. You might know a few strumming patterns, and I'm sure there's lots of people on the stream that know loads and loads about rhythm, but I'm talking about me when I started out. I didn't have a vast library of rhythm approaches, so I didn't really think about it that much. But all these little things that we've spoken about, using these different ways of creating patterns and connections with the vowel sounds, with depending which vowel sounds we're going to hear in different places, with the consonants, with alliteration, with using the same consonant sounds, all of those offer us compositional opportunities. But there is another one that's based on the whole of a line. So let's say that you whisper words of wisdom. Let's just take that. But actually, no, because we all know what that tune is, so that won't work. So let's just take natural melodic rise and fall in speech. I'm not suggesting that's going to be a lyric, but let's just say, if I say that line, natural melodic rise and fall in speech, and if we can already hear that there is pitch change there. Natural, da da da, melodic, da da da, rise and fall in speech. If you want, one interesting thing to do is to almost draw how that moves, and then with whatever scale you're using, and you could do this with any scale, you could do this with all the scales, create a melody contour that matches that. So there is inherently melody in speech, even that word inherently, because if there weren't, we wouldn't be able to understand as well, and language would have to be a lot slower. Where I speak very fast anyway, but if we didn't have melodic variation in speech, it would be much harder to be understood. So that's the linguists' theory of why speech has evolved to have these different pitches in it, so that we can communicate. But that's a compositional opportunity. All we need to do is draw out and exaggerate the melody that's already there, and we've got a starting point. And if your melody goes, what do I go? Inherently. Let's say that went da 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 da, and let's say I had a pentatonic. I'm just going to plug in the notes in pentatonic, and they're going to move da 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 da, and I'm going to start that with that as a melody. Maybe I'm going to try with a major pentatonic. Maybe I'm going to try with I can switch one note out. I can have a major scale, or I can have a Lydian scale, or I can have a Dorian scale, or I can have a mixed Lydian scale, or I can have anything I want. I can have harmonic minor. But if I keep that idea in mind, that gives me a starting point. The other thing is that once you've got a contour that you start with, you can do all kinds of things with it. You can flip it around. You can turn it that way around. You can take the whole da 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 da. You can sequence it. You can use any number of very cool compositional ideas that Tom Hess can teach you to create huge number of related motifs to that original one. And you didn't even have to come up with the original one yourself. It was just like right there already in the phrase. So if you're ever at a point where you've got a line and you're trying to set it to music and you just don't know where to start, that is a really nice starting point you can do anytime, endlessly, again and again. And because you can take a contour and use it with any number of different note groups that you've decided to choose, or any number of different scales, and then you can put it through any number of variations, it's going to be almost impossible not to find something you like.
Yeah.
I see.
You're looking at Cynthia's new question? Me too.
Well, now, this is quite a big topic. I think that you can get good results either way. There's also the question that the more you discover how your own creativity operates, the more you learn how to give it optimal conditions. So some people, they have an idea first of what they want to create, and they are going to deploy techniques to realize that vision. Other people start off with a feeling or one element they like, musically or lyrically. Could be just a word or a line, and they're going to build the song around that, and that's going to inform the other things. And that might be more iterative, because that's going to sort of, the seed for that idea may reveal itself through a few iterations. It might be like, no, that's not quite what this idea needs. So I think the richest conditions you can give yourself in any form of creative endeavor is to try lots of different ways and not get stuck in one way. Because then if you get stuck in one way, the day that way doesn't work for you, or the day you're bored by that way, then you're stuck. And even if that doesn't happen, you might be missing out on the results and the things that you can create using other approaches and techniques. So when you say you should survey what you want to compose before writing lyrics, to me that's a different question than writing? Like, that sounds to me a bit like as if the question is, you should know what it is you want to write about before you write the lyrics, like what the subject.
That's how I interpret it.
And then the question of whether we do lyrics first or music first is, to me, a different question. And I feel like I've been answering that second question, but I'm now going to answer the first one. Should you know what it is you want to compose? That can definitely make it easier, but I do not think that you can set that as a precondition in all cases, because sometimes we're not clear about what we want, exactly what it is we want to say, or exactly what connection is kind of lurking below our conscious level of awareness. And if we limited ourselves to, we could get into being perfectionists. So I don't know exactly what it is I'm trying to do, so I can't start. So sometimes part of the process is activities and a creative practice that allows these ideas to emerge and allows you to start noticing connections. And then that can turn into a direction. So I think it is great if you've got a clear idea of what it is you want to compose before you make a start on lyrics, but that is not always available to us. And we cannot impose that as a precondition in all cases.
Yeah, I agree generally with that. What Cynthia asks, the first part about knowing what it is that you want to generally write about before writing, that describes perfectly my approach to writing. For just me personally, I always begin with, what do I want to say? I write mostly instrumental music anyway, so I'm not personally really writing lyrics, but I'm always thinking specifically, what exactly am I trying to express? And then later comes, how would I do that? What would I do with the harmony, the melody, the rhythm, all of those sorts of things to make that happen? Now, that's the process that I use when actually writing music, but it's not necessarily the process that I use when practicing or developing writing skills. So that's a different thing. If you're practicing to become a better songwriter, then approaching it from many different angles, which I think is maybe where you were kind of going with your answer, Deanna, is good. So that you have more than one process to write, and it helps you acquire skills in a different way. So what you actually choose to do when you're writing for real, that of course that's up to everybody's individual preference. I just expressed mine, but people they can do whatever they want. So yeah, it's a great question though. Let's see, we have I think Deanna, you have something available for people to check out.
Do any lyricists out there, feel free to download my book, 5 Ways to Write Great Lyrics. So there are a few concepts that make a really big difference to the most common lyricist stumbling blocks. And it took me quite a long time to learn about these. But if I'd known them when I was starting out, I would have had a far less frustration. So one very big songwriter lyricist problem is when you've come up with, perhaps, let's say a first verse and a first chorus. You like the tune, you like the chords. First verse and first chorus are fine, but then you can't finish. Can't work out what I should do next. So I'm not going to go into what the commonest reasons for that are, but there are some very common reasons. Again, when that happened to me, I always thought it was just because my idea wasn't good enough or I sucked or whatever. But in fact, there is something to do with the order in which we give information to our listeners that makes a very big difference to how easy it is to get unstuck. That's in there. The other thing that's in there is a concept to do with how listeners' brains process language. So there's categories of language that tell us about the physical world and objects and people and places and things that we can touch or see or smell or hear. And the way that our brain processes that kind of information is very different to the way it processes abstract information. And that has a huge impact on, which I cannot do justice to in this description, to how listenable and enjoyable and memorable your lyrics end up being, and how the flow of ideas seems to be, and whether you like them or not. And I think often when we start out, we don't have a lot of ways to respond to our work apart from I like it or I don't like it. We don't know why it is we don't like it. So there's just 1 or 2 concepts in there. Well, there's 5 concepts, but there's those 2 in particular address really significant problems that could come up with our lyric writing and give you a solid criteria for being able to address some of the problems that you might have. Also has a little calendar for you to get your own writing practice going. So if you're interested in some new input to writing lyrics, or you have never written lyrics before and you want to get started, I urge you to download that and not sort of suffer in frustration like I did for many years.
Very good. And that is totally free, everyone. So you should definitely check that out, download it. She's giving this away for free, and if I were you, I would get it now before she changes her mind. So it's a lot of good stuff in there. I've seen it myself, and it's great stuff. So Deanna, thank you for everything that you shared today. It's a lot of awesome stuff. I learned really a lot today. And that was awesome. And also thanks to those who joined us live and participated and asked some good questions as well. Good to have you all. So thank you, Deanna. Thanks everyone for being here. Hope you got a lot out of it. Take care, everybody.